welcome back to Guns and Gyms. Today's episode is a gym or fitness topic, and today I will be discussing macronutrients. So what is a macronutrient? You'll talk about people counting macros, or you'll hear about the very famous diet plan called If It Fits Your Macros, or IIFYM. I had to make sure of that. Before I said, I was like, is it that one? But yes, IIFYM, If It Fits Your Macros. So what is a macronutrient? You've probably heard of them. You just may not have heard of them called macronutrients. It's carbs, fat, and protein. Sometimes you'll see the big four, and then they will include alcohol in that too. I'm not going to be discussing alcohol on this podcast. I'm probably going to be discussing it on a different episode, but not on this episode because it's not essential for life. And yes, while it does have a calorie count and we do have to work with alcohol in people's programs, I'm not counting it as a macronutrient. So I'm not a nutritionist, I just want to put that out there, but I've studied a lot in this area, from being studying it in school to where I had like nutrition and health classes and biology and stuff like that, and then learning on the practical side, helping people lose weight with macros and helping them manipulate their macros, talking to other trainers about it, and learning how it is applied in a bodybuilding application specifically, which I think is very interesting because bodybuilding is such nutrition based, and that's where I've learned a lot of my stuff from. So you'll see that kind of come through as I talk. Like, yes, I do have a very large bodybuilding background and less of, traditional athletes where you have them exerting energy on their during their sport, whereas bodybuilding, you do everything behind the scenes and then you come to stage and then that is your moment, versus a big game, a big tournament, etc. So carbohydrates, first one we'll talk about. Why do carbohydrates get a bad rap? Carbs tend to get a bad rap, I think so, because they turn to fat, quote unquote. And while this is true, a lot of the issue with carbs can be attributed to, if you will, user error. I feel like I could go on a whole rant about the American diet, the American food sources, where we get our vegetables, our foods, our packaged goods, and the issues with it and everything. And if you want to hear more about that, just listen to people like Max Lugavare. I think I said that right, but I'll try and put his podcast, The Genius Life, in the description, and then Dr. Mark Hyman, of course, and they both talk about how to eat to optimize your life, and not just from an athlete standpoint, and it can be applied to athletes and people in the gym, but just from a daily life, quality of life standpoint, which I think is really important as people age. They cover those topics too. So to sum it up, carbohydrates tend to get a bad rap because people are eating too many processed foods and too many simple carbohydrates that are not being used by the body and then are turned into fat for storage. So if you have an excess amount of carbohydrates in your diet, if your body's not using them, it'll turn it into fat, which is obviously not what you want, but it is a survival mechanism by the body, which in theory should be great. And I just think the way that we work and the lifestyles that we lead, you really have to watch your carbohydrate intake. So if someone's active, the body is able to effectively use the macronutrients given to it throughout the day and appropriately store it. But if you're not eating to give your body what it needs and really nothing more, then that's when we run into problems. To talk about RDA a little bit, you'll see traditionally people saying anywhere from 45 to 60% of calories should come from your carbohydrates. I think that this number needs to be a little bit defined, and saying that you need to be looking at vegetables and high fiber foods. Yes, this is a great number. But if you're having all simple and processed carbohydrates, and that's 45 to 60% of your calories, that number could be a problem. And I will talk a little bit at the end of my episode about how I structure nutrition, and at least for myself, and then how I've seen other people do it. So, also want to say that people do not eat enough fiber, and that is why I always encourage people, especially when they start training with me, to keep a food journal and see where their nutrients are exactly coming from. A food journal analysis can help you figure out if you need more or less fiber in your diet. You probably think of fiber when it comes to staying regular and helping with your bowel movements. And while it does that, I think that there are so many other areas where fiber just shines. High fiber diets have been attributed to help reduce the risk of heart diseases and stuff like that. And then recently, I think with the keto diet, you've seen many more high fiber products come into stores, which I think is an awesome thing. Keto bread tends to have a little bit more higher carbohydrates than regular bread. Supplementing, if you need to supplement, look at your daily intake and see, am I hitting my fiber goals? Am I not hitting my fiber goals? Do I need to supplement, or do I need to change my diet? I think that that is a good way. Choosing the lettuce that you eat, I think, is really important. Your greens, instead of doing iceberg, choosing romaine, spinach, stuff like that. And then I want to touch briefly on simple and complex carbohydrates. Your simple carbohydrates are made of simple and complex. Many times refer to the chemical structure of the carbohydrate molecule alone. So simple has smaller pieces, whereas complex has longer chains. Simple carbohydrates include sugar, things that digest very easily in the body. Complex tend to be whole grains, legumes, beans, and non-starchy vegetables. So I think prioritizing your complex carbohydrates over your simple carbohydrates is really, really important when it comes to health and wellness. And I think that that's something that people need to think about when they are creating their plans and everything like that. You'll see things like simple carbohydrates include like candy, donuts, juices, fruit juices, sugary cereal, etc. And so many times simple carbohydrates are also highly processed. Not to say that complex carbohydrates can't be highly processed, but many times simple carbohydrates tend to be the processed carbohydrate. Complex include things like sweet potatoes, oatmeal, multigrain high fiber breads, lentils, peas, etc. I think kale also, or kale, spinach, carrots, a lot of vegetables, things that you want to add more into your diet. So, yeah, prioritize those over the other, and then again, your food journal will help you figure out, am I good? Do I need more? Do I need less? All right, so protein. This is the golden macro, if you will. This is a macro that you look for in foods, and brands are happy to advertise X amount of grams of protein per serving in their foods. Here's what's really cool about protein. And this is coming from an overview article in the NIH National Library of Medicine by Alex Leaf and Jose Antonio. The quote says, "Dietary protein appears to have a protective effect against fat gain during the times of energy surplus, especially when combined with resistance training. Therefore, the evidence suggests that dietary protein may be the key macronutrient in terms of promoting positive changes in body composition." That is awesome to hear. And when I was reading that article, I think it was very interesting because they brought up different studies about people who were fed in excess of calories, which meant that the people in the study were feeding the participants more calories than they were needed. And there were more people who were getting more carbs than they needed, more fat than they needed, and then more protein that they were needed. And then they looked at sedentary people versus people in resistance training programs. And they consistently found that the presence of protein and the excess of protein had a different effect than the excess of carbohydrates and fat in the diet, which I think is awesome. In the same article, and this is talking about recommended daily allowances, Leaf and Antonio suggested that people participating in weightlifting programs should do 2.2 to 3.4 grams per kilogram of weight per day as the appropriate amount. So what does that mean? So if I have a 200-pound client, he is 90 kilograms, right? Okay, so times that, the low amount is 198 to 306 grams of protein each day. So that's what they were finding on their study. For people not in resistance programs, it would be different amount because of the way that the body chooses to use the macronutrients. I think that they were finding in those studies that people were better able to use to digest excess in protein if they were in the resistance training program, but not so as much if they were not, which I think kind of tells you that the presence of muscle tends to eat up the protein a little bit different. For myself, I've done about the 2.2 range, and that's been awesome, so that works for me. Another thing that you will hear is amino acids. You'll hear them called the building blocks of protein, and if you've taken any biology or nutrition class, that should be a very, very familiar saying. I feel like that is one way that everyone decides to explain amino acids. It's not a wrong way because that is what they do. They help build muscle, which is why you see people in bodybuilding talk about drinking their BCAAs, which is valine, isoleucine, and leucine, and those specifically help with muscle growth. I've noticed with my programs, I do best when I do take branched chain amino acids, that I tend to notice a lot less soreness from the previous workouts. And that's one of the biggest things stopping people from having good workouts can be muscle soreness from previous workouts. Recently I had a situation where I was not able to go to the gym for about a week. I was doing workouts at home, but obviously you can get bands that are very heavy, but nothing will work you like the 45-pound barbell with some weights on it. So getting back into it the next week, my muscles were just so sore, like that, getting the body used to it. And I think the lack of soreness, I could have been a lot more sore, but I was taking a branched chain amino acid along with protein and pre-workout, so I think I had it less than I would have, but it was still, I was still feeling it the next day. So let's talk about analysis of macros. So the place where I start with my clients is by having them track their macros for at least 1 week eating normally. I will have them set goals in the app for macro parameters to hit, but it is not as important. The first week is merely just to gain information on where this person is starting at and what exactly I'm working with to begin with. Then, after the first week, I get a good idea of what's going on. Different clients require different macro splits, and men and women will have different ranges also. A female bodybuilding client will be different from my male weight loss transformation macro split. It is all about the goals that we're trying to accomplish. So usually I will have people look at them through one of three methods: MyFitnessPal, my macros plus, and then an Excel tracker or just like paper journal where you're just writing down, I ate X amount of this. MyFitnessPal is probably the most well-known one on this list. It is famous just for the marketing that it does and the large food database that users are able to pull from. They used to have a pretty awesome scanning feature, but to my knowledge it is actually going away in like a month's time, which I'm kind of sad about. And then you're gonna have to pay $10 a month for that, so $120 a year, really, it is not worth it to me. So I will probably be moving from MyFitnessPal over to a different app that I will talk about in a second. But just for your basics and getting into... Alright, the most traditional one is the Excel tracker or paper journal. This is just writing it down. I ate X amount of this food for lunch. Okay, perfect. It's probably the easiest way, especially when you're just getting started. Like if you do an intake with me and I want you to do tracking, maybe the easiest way to do things, since you're not having to download an app, make an account, etc. But it can be a bit time consuming. whereas apps like MyFitnessPal and MyMacros tend to make it as easy as possible. So now we're going to talk about MyMacros, which is something I'm really excited about moving to in the next few months. So MyMacros is a competitor to MyFitnessPal, and it is very popular within the bodybuilding world. They brag that they have over 5 million items. You can have as many meals as you want, which is probably one of the reasons why bodybuilders like it, because we tend to eat like 6 small meals versus 3 large ones. And they have the coveted barcode scanner, because I don't want to have to pay $120 a year for that. You can set macro goals to the gram. MyFitnessPal only has percentages. And then it has a social side, which doesn't mean a lot to me, but it could mean a lot to other people. Instead of being a recurring subscription payment like MyFitnessPal, MyMacros is a one-time payment of $2.99, and that sounds a lot better to me. I believe that they do have a MyMacros Plus Pro version, and it's only $2 a month, which is really good considering it's only, and then you can pay for like $20 a year, which sounds fairly good to me. So how do I set up this plan? How do I set up this plan? And this is the way that I tend to do things. Again, not a nutritionist. This is the way that I've done this in the past for me. And it might add good structure for you, but talk to your physician, talk to a trainer, talk to a nutritionist. I take my weight and I figure out how many calories I need for this specific goal. If I'm losing weight, if I'm trying to gain muscle, what am I doing? And then I figure out how much protein I need according to the 2.2 grams per kilogram per day amount. Then I'm saying that 25 to 30% of the calories should be coming from fat, and then the carbohydrates are the rest of that amount. And then I am obviously prioritizing my fiber, my complex carbs, etc. That usually gives me a beginner area to start out at that gives me a pretty good even macro split, or I'm not eating a ton of protein and then having like gut troubles. I'm not eating carbohydrates and not feeling great, not eating a whole bunch of fat and getting acne. So that split actually works pretty well for me, and I've been doing that for a while and really liking it. So I hope that you all enjoy that overview of macros. I might be doing individual ones on each one. Like if I find multiple really fascinating studies about protein, I think I might do a feature on protein or something like that. But anyway, wanted to make that for everyone on a basis of what are they, how to track, and then where to go from there. Anyway, thank you for listening, and next week will be a gun episode.